I'm sorry, I wasn't here yesterday. I heard wonders about the debates that I missed. I have to teach students. So let's hope that the world is not worse off. They learn something, I miss something, as it was before. Okay. I'm presenting you something that is a bit of a kind of research project, but I think you have the right audience to have good feedback on that. This is part of a project financed by the University of Rijeka here. I'm here from the University of Rijeka. And though I'm not working on philosophy of religion, but I would like to share something with you about the interface of neuroscience with normative practices, and sure we have things to about myself. So, there are general problems concerning how philosophy, conceptual investigation should contribute to the integration of advancement in the study of brain, mind behavior with practices, especially in the area of exculpation in criminology, how philosophy could give a contribution. And so the questions are, what kind of questions should philosophers investigate and how they should investigate these questions? In several years with colleagues and group, research group, we find a productive way to investigate this question by focusing on a specific class of offenders. So we focus on psychopaths or better offenders, psychopaths. And this is a personality disorder characterized by antisocial behavior, lack of empathy, and manipulativeness, and other features. And with a colleague, John McKenna, we are exploring the debates surrounding the criminal responsibility of psychopaths, and also done some work on thinking methodologically what philosophers have learned from all this long debate on whether or not this type of criminals are responsible or not. My thesis is that, first of all, the debate on psychopathy has been very interesting, very complex. It has involved legal scholars, philosophers, but we have the sense that the debate is, as a statement, is blocked. There is no way to go further in this debate. And recently we proposed with also neuropsychologists in Brazil, Rüdiger is another philosopher, a kind of way to push the debate a bit forward, the philosophical debate on whether or not psychopaths are responsible. And here I would like to show you how inside this project that we advance the role of philosophy. And I use conceptual engineering, so today is the second time we talk about conceptual engineering. Basically because conceptual engineering is a very useful tool if you do conceptual work in the interdisciplinary settings as the one we are in this case. The core of this engineering, I don't know how many of you are familiar with analytic philosophy. Analytic philosopher wanted to describe current usage or use or expert use of concepts. So they are kind of descriptive aim. Engineering concepts is a prescriptive approach. The idea is to offer definitions, stipulative definitions that enable to reach aims that explicitly we recognize and argue that are the good aims that we want to reach by using that concept. So that's what we are trying to do in this. Okay, you may recognize that in many neuroethical investigation may fall under this general argumentative schema. We have a normative realm, in this case is law, and so we have something, principle like, oh, if someone has certain abilities, then we ought to exculpate that person. That's a typical thing you may find inside law. If you are not capable to do certain things, you are not capable for your crimes. And this is part of a normative practice, in this case law or criminal law. In the other, and then you try to bring inside this normative practice stuff coming from sciences. Let's call it a normative descriptive premise, where you show that there are data about the neuropsychology, psychology, computational psychology, performances in psychological behavioral paradigms that seems to be relevant for the conclusion whether or not that class of individual are those inabilities that in the normative context, for example, may exculpate you. And then you get the normative conclusion that therefore those people should be exculpated. And I think by analyzing this argumentative schema, you can shape a general area of problems of the class philosophy, like Insanity defense is my target normative practices in this talk, but also in my research. So if you commit a crime, many legal systems recognize that if you, due to a moral legal, to a mental disorder, you lack certain moral or capacities of understanding what you are doing, or understanding legally the significance of your action, or you, even if you are misunderstanding, are not capable to control your action on the basis of misunderstanding, you are not capable. And unfortunately, laws are different, so for philosophers, that's a complication. We would like to have one single story, but we could say there is a convergence in the principal legal system, including here in Croatia, that these two conditions may exculpate an offender. And then, of course, I was mentioning psychopathy. Psychopathy generates an incredibly complex, articulated debate because psychopathy, this class of antisocial individuals, has been in the recent, I would say, 30 years or so, the focus of a lot of scientific investigations, going from advancement in the psychometrics of the measure of this construct towards hypotheses about the underlying causes of this kind of antisociality correlated to this disorder, even genetic, neuroimaging. You find all the kind of apparatus of contemporary science of mind, brain, behavior addressing this category of individuals. And there were a couple of results that really philosophers read this result, also legal scholars, and they were very impressed. One of these results was the different performance of psychopaths in the so-called conventional moral paradigm. It's a behavioral paradigm where you test the capacity of an individual to classify different types of violations. Moral are those who involve violating some more serious principles that are more universal, that they don't depend on the presence of an authority who enforces them. Conventionals are those who have less of these features. And Blair and colleagues, they show that psychopaths and youth with psychopathic tendencies perform worse than control on this kind of categorization, the type of violation. And philosophers took, we took this data showing that psychopaths maybe had problem in moral understanding. Because, for example, if you don't understand the difference by killing someone and talking when you are not allowed in class and do both this violation are of the same type, there could be some indication that you may have a problem in understanding the morality of your actions, and this could affect your accountability. Unfortunately for us, there were several lines of argument against this interpretation. One was that this paradigm, it wasn't good enough to measure moral competence. I'll go into details, but even more damaging for us, for all these philosophers who went down that route, was the fact that these results were not replicated. There were more extensive studies with individuals classified as psychopaths. Nowadays, one of the paradigmatic measure of psychopathy is the psychopathy checklist analyzed by Robert Kerr. So by using this unified measure tool and really analyzing extensive numbers of individual psychopathy or subclinical psychopathy, these results were not replicated. So we missed the evidence for arguing that these kind of individuals are not legally or morally accountable. There is another area. Here results are more robust. These results are not being disproved. They are being replicated. All the experts in the scientific study of psychopathy, they say that's the more robust results we have. So there was a series of studies showing that the psychopaths have problem in instrumental learning. If you start from the PCLR measurement of this disorder, you find impulsivity is one of the key elements of the disorder. And so this impulsivity can really be also measured in this kind of task. Usually these are tasks that involve gaming with cars or other type of games. And it was discovered that psychopaths, those who were classified with PCLR as psychopaths, were performing much worse than other control, both in changing strategies, if they're playing cards, and so they would adopt a winning strategy, then the conditions would change, that strategy would become a losing strategy, control will change the strategy, psychopaths will persevere in using strategy. And these are robust. So far, there is not anyone who would maybe deny the robustness of this impulsivity. Impulsivity, control. So again, philosopher, this time I wasn't involved, but some philosophers interpret this as a evidence. Look, these people, maybe they understand morality, maybe they understand conventions that we have in our society, but maybe they cannot control. Look, they have this kind of impulsivity. Again, the problem here was that these experiments were not ecologically valid. To a sense that they, you would observe the specificities in the performance and instrumental task with psychopaths if you consider given certain type of rewards, given that they could not pay attention to certain aspect of the situation and so on and so forth. And so there is now, hopefully I'm the right side of this story, with my colleagues and other colleagues, philosophers and legal scholars and community scientists, they tend to agree that, okay, these results are there about psychopaths, but they're not robust enough for thinking they could have any impact on judging their moral or legal responsibility, given that they are so complex and specific. So what do? Do we try to have better experiments to see whether or not psychopaths are morally responsible? We abandon the project completely. That would be we abandon an interesting neuroethical project of seeing if we could, by mere advancement of scientific knowledge, individuate a class of individuals who are not accountable for the law. We think that it's not a good idea to abandon the project, but of course it would be a good idea to abandon the category of psychopathy as we know it now. And so we did in Brazil, we wrote this paper, we were lucky to have it published in Neuroethics, and there we tried to think more philosophically. Inti is a scientist working on psychopaths, both with some kind of empirical, theoretical grounding in contemporary science, how we could go further in this debate. And we noticed two main problems with the psychopathy as we know it. These problems are coming from the measure of psychopathy. PCLR, and then nowadays you have a version of psychopathy, but they don't call it psychopathy, they call it antisocial personality disorder in DSM-5. Both these ways of measuring these conditions, they are syndrome-based. Basically, you observe behaviors, infer mental states, you load also symptomatic personality trait, and you build the category. And this type of way of categorizing mental disorder or mental conditions is not bad, because you can get enough reliability that you can allow people to talk about these things, communicate, measure them. But they have low validity. It's not sure if really we are capturing with these measures or diagnosis something that we want to capture, something real or something that is real enough to allow us prediction, retrodiction, and treatment. Plus, there is problem of heterogeneity when you try to classify people in this way, and also it's not clear how this classification integrates with neuroscience, genetics, and epigenetics. So that would be the first problem. Probably psychopathy was an exciting category for this type of study, but maybe it's too heterogeneous to get any solid conclusion about whether or not this individual, when they offend, is culpable. So that's the first problem. The other problem, and I think is much more our contribution, because basically, if you know a bit of the contemporary psychiatry, you know that a lot of people are not happy with the way of classifying mental disorder, that you find DSM made something that is similar to what we do in DSM. Our original contribution is also this. Look, but if we want to check whether or not there is a category of individuals who are, given their neurological, neuropsychological, neurocomputational makeup, to be exculpated, why we don't build a category directly to check this? Why we go to a proxy of clinical categories when we want to do forensic psychiatry? Why we don't try to build directly forensic psychiatrically relevant categories? And that's the idea. So that's the idea. What would be involved in doing something like that? So here we are entering kind of, I don't know, not science fiction, let's say, highly theoretical speculation about how we could categorize these individuals. We think that we should start from the legally relevant abilities. We start from the legally relevant abilities as our starting point. The concepts of this notion, these abilities should help us to start to frame what we want to investigate. And at the most general level, these two categories are abilities concerning understanding, control, and of course, if you do the flip side of responsibility, exculpation, the inabilities to understanding and control. What do we have to mean when we talk about these things? Then we have to do the further step to find ways to individuate, operationalize these abilities in a way that can be implemented, put in relation with neuropsychological abilities, and then push the research even further, define underpinning the neuropsychological explanation or how correlates of these neuropsychologically relevant abilities or inabilities that may affect the legally exculpating inabilities. And then you see the last diagram is also the idea that maybe when we go to this kind of process of explanation or finding correlates, we may also fire back on the initial conceptualization of our notion of ability. I think, with all the difference in content, what we're trying to do today has many similarities with what was presented about mystical experience. What we should get, the idea would be to rebuild categories of antisocial individuals for forensic purposes. So we may start with psychopathy, externalizing behavior, we can start with all these present measures that we have about antisocial disorder, and then we could try to integrate with data concerning genetic risk, vulnerability, physiology, whatever. But the important thing that one of the central elements in this categorization is to test individual in relation to what we take to be relevant causes, correlates, grounds for ascription of abilities or inabilities that are forensically relevant in our case for exculpation. So that's it. Let's build this category of individuals that are similar insofar they are unaccountable, but also let's try to see what are the underlying mechanisms. And so we could hope, for example, from psychopaths, we could remove those who classify as psychopaths but don't have any type of robust element at whichever of this integrated data level you want to disqualify them for exculpation. How do we do that? And so we have a bridging here. So we think that philosophers, in a sense, should give hand. They don't have the last word, but they should help in connecting the inabilities that are relevant for exculpation with what neuroscientists or neuropsychologists or psychologists can investigate in building those categories. I really think that this is a conceptual problem. Of course, it's a huge empirical problem, but we see also as something that not necessarily philosopher, whoever likes to do conceptual work can join in helping to. It's not a complete translation, but I'll tell you something about to connect how we can spell out the inabilities required by the law and building requirements, diagnostic requirements, if you like, for individuating subclasses of antisocial individuals who are not accountable. I put Plato as an example of philosophy trying to do this. Bridges, that's the topic we're talking about. And I think, so the question will emerge by trying to do that type of interaction. The question that we should ask as philosophers when we want to interface science with law, in this case, exculpation. How do we do that? And we think, but probably that's kind of forced choice. When you want to integrate multidisciplinary stuff, you cannot play the old philosophical game of sitting a priori thinking what is the best definition of justice, knowledge, or freedom. You have to interact with these other disciplines and practices. And so we think that this interaction is better captured not by the attempt to describing concepts, but to engineer them. We have to be explicit. Look, we give you concepts of abilities relevant for law that are not a priori correct. Just to say that's the best thing we can offer you if these are the aims you want to reach in this kind of lecture. So we have to define the aims, the goals that we may want to satisfy in that interface between science and law, and then we introduce the concept that may help us to get there. What are the central aims in engineering the concept of exculpatory inability? First of all, we have the not easy task to integrate legal doctrines of criminal exculpation, insanity defense, and philosophical account of moral responsibility. Then I'll show you how this works. To elaborate a detailed account of these inabilities that are relevant for exculpation in a way that they are more precise, and so we can go towards operationalization, then we can go towards measure, empirical testing of behavioral performances, and hopefully pushing this then to hypotheses and theory and data about the causes, the underlying mechanisms of those performances. So this idea of developing construct, of course, this is already work for psychologists, but philosophers could be there mediating conceptualization coming from the law towards conceptualization that may lead to construct that we can measure. There is another aspect, I'm not going to say anything about this. The concept of ability itself in its generality may be something that needs to analyze. Because you may realize that as those experiments that are being deemed not useful for law because they are not ecologically valid, this opens up the problem how robust has to be an ability to be useful for the legal context. Because in the legal context, mostly you do retrodiction. So now, after 3 years, you judge whether or not that person, when he committed the crime, understood what he was doing. You don't have all the information about the context where the crime happened, but you need enough robust scientific evidence to say things like being a psychopath or being a member of that restricted class of individual who commit antisocial thing. He has this kind of makeup, neurological makeup. That neurological makeup is enough to give you the sense that he has an ability that manifests in a wide range of contexts. Because you don't have all the information. Usually you don't have all the information about the crime. So you need the kind of proving, not just that the person sometimes playing certain cards is impulsive. You need an account that is robust enough for one inability that can be used in this retroductive procedure in the court when the expert brings the evidence in front of the court. So maybe we need also to think hard what lawyer says when someone, so this is, but I'm not telling much about this. I want just to focus on the other two aspects. So the normative dimension of the operation here is to have an analysis of the relevant incapacities that would exculpate. And already there is a very interesting, of course, literature about these issues. Legal scholars are working on this. I'll give you an example. It's very important. It was very important for the case of psychopaths. There are different legal traditions, different legal systems that they understand differently the notion of moral understanding required for being accountable. In certain legal systems, moral understanding means tracking the laws in that society as if you were an anthropologist. You go there, you see the people follow those rules. If you understand that you commit a crime, you understood enough the legal system to be accountable. I think this is the UK, that's kind of tradition, also in the States. Why, for example, in Australia, is not, the moral understanding is not just tracking the convention of the society you are in. You also you need a sense of why these laws are there. There are laws against killing. It's not enough that you know, okay, if I kill someone, I will punish. Why killing is wrong? Why this society recognize killing as well? What could be the reasons behind? And so this type of interpretation of moral understanding is more demanding. Exactly between these two understandings, we were trying to plug psychopaths because they, of course, they understand convention. They manipulate people. They know if they do something wrong, they are punished. But the idea was that the studies were showing that they have this lack of understanding why people matter, especially those moral conventional distinction. Plus people lose lack of empathy, so they don't have a rich understanding of the legal violation, so they don't have the kind of understanding that we want them to have. And of course, then you have to look at what's the point of punishing people, are we communicating with them our values? Are we just trying to modify their behavior? Do we want just to lock them away because they're not dangerous? So a lot of things to load on how conceptually we can spell out these abilities. I would say at the top of this normative practice that is the law. And here you have also to calibrate philosophy, law. You have to find the best concepts, the best capture what you want to do with the exploitation. So which abilities? For example, this is a very thin example I'm giving to you, but thin not completely because it's really operative, this example. So if you take whichever legal system, you go down to the criminal law, and you see what's going on in the insanity defense, for example. This, the letter, the formulation of these requirements for being unaccountable are very thin, very little. You find things like, if at the moment of committing the crime you were not of sound mind, if you didn't understand the nature of your action, if you couldn't control your action, end of the story. The law doesn't tell you more than that. Going from this thin characterization of the concept of inabilities to do experiment and scanning the brain, a lot of conceptual steps are missing. How I measure not knowing the nature of my action by scanning the brain. And philosophers, legal scholars, they try to feel, to give more substance to these notions. But the law is very resistant, and they have their own reasons why they do that, to embed those specific notions inside the law. But of course, one thing is the formulation of the law, and other things is kind of admissible evidence, kind of ways where you can prove or disprove this one is accountable. And here I give a simple example of a, we'll say, philosophical engineering of the notion of of the abilities required for legal responsibility. And here the key notion is practical reason. Someone understands and controls his behavior on the basis of the requirement of law if he has enough capacity to grasp and be guided by good reasons in particular legal context. They must be capable of rational, practical reasoning. That's a bit of engineering. We introduce rationality as a requirement for spelling out the inabilities or abilities for exploitation. Now, let's assume that this philosophical interpretation, and this is why, it's used, lawyers in the court, they can use experts in the courts, they can say the person wasn't practical rational. But here is still we are very far from interfacing with the neurosciences. So what are the psychological paradigms to measure the presence of these rational practical abilities? This is a bit conceptual, but of course we have also to ask the experts. And this is something that wasn't done with psychopaths. With psychopaths, you would use tests about the skin conductance because the scientists were interested whether or not they would lie without being detected in the lie detector. And then the philosophers or legal scholars were using those results to see or not psychopaths were responsible. Here the idea, no, we have to build, there are some already paradigms who are really significant to test if someone has the capacities that philosophically, legally we think are necessary in the moral context to expropriate. Accusing, punishing the crimes. And so this is the kind of top-down. Or is also something that I think if we do this kind of engineering, we need also the feedback. We may, by finding these paradigms, we may refine how we understand these abilities, inabilities in the context of the law. Also, we can disambiguate. For example, the law started with this false psychological assumption that there is a clear distinction between understanding reason and acting on the basis of these reasons. This will push the neuroscientists to find two different systems in the brain to do these things. And they would say, look, the understanding reason system is broken, so the person, or the control system is broken, so the person is not 3 minutes to the end. Okay. But it could be that there are no such separate systems. So we have to revise somehow the law. Okay, I'm finished.